He'll throw himself down on the floor if he doesn't get his way. If we don't respond immediately to his demands. So we try and do everything we can as parents to make the crying stop. And the child makes its first educational discovery. Cry and I'll get what I want. Cry and I will be served. And then the child turns 3 and throws himself on the floor in the middle of the aisle at the grocery store because we won't buy them a box of chocolate frosted sugar bombs. So to avoid embarrassment, we buy them a box of chocolate frosted sugar bombs. And then the child turns 7 and throws herself on the living room floor because we tell them to put their device down and come to the table for dinner. So we tell them, okay, 5 more minutes and then you'll put it down and come to eat. And then the child turns 13 and gets mad because we won't let them go to their friend's house for the weekend because there won't be any parental supervision. And so to ease their anger, we tell them we'll allow them this one time if they promise not to get into any trouble. I know that one. And the child turns 16 and tell us they hate us because we won't let them take the family car because they're failing 2 classes in school. And so we tell them, okay, but this weekend you're not going anywhere unless you complete your homework. And by the time they enter adulthood, they're believing that their needs and wants take precedence over those of anyone else. Paul urges the reader to make a drastic change in their lives by turning our backs on this lifelong lifestyle of feeding our egos and instead look at the people around us and consider them to maybe just be a little bit better than ourselves. And to take into account maybe their interests might be a little more fun than my interests. Let's give it a try. I believe the number one reason that relationships fail, whether it be marriages, friendships, neighbors, whatever the relationship is, it's that one party in the relationship refuses to consider the needs or the interests of the other or others. Paul goes on and he gives us the example of Christ. In verse 5, he's effectively saying, let me describe an actual person who we all know that lived this life that way, and he proceeds to talk about the humility of Jesus. Go with me on this one. Close your eyes for just a moment. Every eye closed, every head bowed. Imagine the most idyllic place that you can imagine. I'll give you a second there to put yourself in the middle of your idyllic place. What is it that makes it so special? Is it beauty? Is it peacefulness? Fun? Colorful? Imagine that this is the place that you're going to spend eternity. Marvel at it. Rest in it. Breathe in its purity. Now, imagine the tranquility being ripped away as you travel through a dark tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, there's a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds, and your nostrils are filled with the aroma of manure. How do you feel? That was Jesus. Jesus existed in heaven, and he left the holiness of that place, which was more idyllic than our feeble minds can conceive. John writes that Jesus, the Logos, the Word, was with God and was God. And God's existence, his very being, demands that he and he alone should be worshipped. But when the time came for Jesus to depart the perfection of heaven and come to earth, he gave up the position of worthiness to be worshipped and took on the frail body of a baby who would spend 30 years and change living in that imperfect body for the sole purpose of going through something he would never have to experience if he had stayed within the confines of heaven. and that would be death. Rather than an eternity of being served, what did Jesus do? He humbled himself, and he became the ultimate example of what it is to be a servant. So there's the example of Christ. Let's look at the reward of humility. Paul tells us in verse 9 that by taking on the identity of a humble servant, Jesus ultimately was exalted to the highest place and gave him the name that it's above every name, that the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And you know, this serves as a profound truth for us, and that is that God honors and lifts up the humble. You go back to Matthew chapter 5. We're not going to turn there now, but chapter 25 is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches the Beatitudes. Blessed is the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, they'll be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, they'll see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they'll be called the sons of God. Blessed are the persecuted, for theirs, like the poor in spirit, is the kingdom of heaven. That's the reward, the kingdom of heaven. What's the reward of arrogance? What joy is there in arrogance? How many people like to spend time with arrogant people? I can't stand it. I'm so great. I'm so wonderful. Well, I'm glad you are. I hope that you have a good life. We tend to be drawn to people who give of their lives rather than who try to draw people in. Those people are humble, and we naturally are drawn to the humble. So what's it like to live out humility? How do we go about living out humility in our daily lives? Well, it begins with looking at ourselves in the mirror and convincing ourselves that we're not as important as we may think. To some degree, I think each of us has a little bit of a sense of self-importance, but consider for a moment the vastness of this universe and how minute this planet is. We look at our planet from our eyes and we see this big ball. We don't even see it as a ball because it's so big. But if you go out into space, it becomes this little ball in the vastness of the universe. Then consider if our Earth is just this tiny little speck. Think about how tiny we are. We're not that important in view of the vastness of the universe. We're significantly nothing. I'm not that important in the whole scheme of things, am I? But you know what? If you reduce the vastness of the universe down to my neighborhood, in my neighborhood, maybe there's an elderly woman whose husband just passed away. They were married 54 years. This is not an actual thing. I'm just talking off the top of my head. This lady has a limited income. She has an ever-shrinking pool of friends because that's what happens as you grow older. Your friend pool goes from really huge when you were young to just a few people. Suddenly, I have the opportunity to be very important to that person. I have the ability to share a meal, to mow her lawn, to wash her windows, to play a game of cards. In other words, I have the opportunity to be a servant to her. And I humble myself by realizing that Her life and her needs are much more important than what I'd rather be doing. It comes down to a shifting of our mindset. Instead of seeking out fulfillment of our own pleasures, we begin to look for service opportunities. I'm going to make a plug here real quick. Brian, I think you'll appreciate this. Last night, Rule 62 met here at our church. Rule 62, what is that, you say? Rule 62 is a speakers meeting for Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous, as you know, is an organization that its sole commitment is to help people sober up, to turn their back on alcohol, to improve their lives. And it has worked for all these years as long as people follow the 12 steps, to work, as they say, the 12 steps. Most of you have not come to be a part of Rule 62. And I would encourage you to just once come, and there's absolutely nothing required of you but to be a presence here. Nothing. Because one of the foundations of Alcoholics Anonymous is that they urge people to become servants. Because in becoming servants, they turn their back on their selfishness. And so this group of people, it is generally bigger than the group of people that's here right now. They come and they spend a few hours and they have fun. They have a raffle that they use to raise money for their programming. To bring in their speakers from all across the United States. They have beanie babies they throw. But you wouldn't believe how excited these full-grown adults are to be able to catch a beanie baby. But they're here, and sometimes I wonder if that group of people isn't more authentic as a church than we sometimes are. And it's because people come and they're honest. At the beginning, people line up and they come up and they say,